Welcome to Breakaway, the minor hockey podcast. I'm Aaron Wilbur, your host, founder of the Coaches site, and as always, I am joined by the executive director of the OMHA, that's the Ontario Minor Hockey Association, Mr. Ian Taylor. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, Aaron. Great to see you. Great to talk to you. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Hockey season is on. We're
it's on, right?
Well, yeah. We're certainly up and running, and teams are back on the ice. Those who didn't have tryouts in the spring had fall tryouts, but that also means house leagues are getting going. I would say everyone is ramping up. Now we've got this kind of longer runway before regular season starts, which is good. So we got a couple weeks before that happens, but yeah, no, I think we're in a really good spot. It's great.
That's great to hear. Obviously just in kind of my day-to-day conversations, chatting with people who work in hockey at various levels. It's funny. Like, I feel like for the last 4 weeks, in the summertime, you talk to people and, you're like, how's it going? They're like, it's okay. Like, they're just laid back. And right now, it's anytime you ask that question to anybody, it's just like, oh my God, like I'm 20 feet underwater. I'm just trying to find the surface. Do you find that that's kind of the case? And then we're kind of, I almost feel like we're at that peak where it's gonna level out and we can just enjoy the season.
Yeah, you know what? It really, I think you'll appreciate this with kids, and I think people wake up and it's Labor Day, Monday, and they're like, school starts tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hockey starts, or whatever, again, what activities they've got going. And it's just like light switch, goes off over here, goes on over here. And then it's just like hit the ground running. But it happens every year. So I'm not sure why we're surprised, but it still happens. And then you've got just kind of what you're talking about, because we're, in our case, teams are on the ice, exhibition games. This past weekend was the first weekend for tournaments. So that was gangbusters and teams getting rostered. And so it's everyone's spinning a little bit right now, but it's good. It's good. We're in a good spot. I'll tell you, we've, since our last call, we've launched our Hockey is Fun campaign. We've got a lot of good. We've got a lot of good feedback on that, and it's interesting the feedback we've received. The feedback we've received has been kind of two parts. One, this feeling that. Have you had to promote hockey before? This seems odd, right? So to people from the outside, so that's an interesting kind of conversation to have, to say, people have a lot of options, and kids are specializing in sports earlier, and we just went through a pandemic. So talking that through, it's really interesting to hear someone say, that's odd. We live in Canada. What do you mean? So that's been an interesting conversation. But the other interesting conversation is just telling people, reminding people that hockey is fun, and just saying it. And then it's kind of people kind of go, yeah, I get that. It is fun, but we've never had to. So combining those two, we've never had to do it before, and maybe we didn't kind of feel that we had to. But so anyway, it's been really good. So I'm going to tell you, so through in all of our conversations we're going to have this year, I'm going to hopefully pull it back to how somehow this makes hockey fun, or that's going to be our kind of cornerstone that we're going to always refer back to. So, keep me honest on this, and because everything should come back to that point this year. That's our rallying cry, and as we said before, we sat around the table, and I don't want to have to say remind ourselves why we love it, because we knew we did. But if we're telling people to play hockey or why play hockey, that's That's at the very foundation of it. So anyway, I'm going to throw one more thing at you. When I talk about this stuff, my wife rolls her eyes at me. Okay. So she thinks so she makes fun of me basically and says, as I go out the door, she'll say, work hard and have fun. She'll say
Go get him, Tiger.
Oh yeah. She says that.
Well,
so,
if it's any consolation, my wife rolls her eyes every time I open my mouth.
But it's this, oh, now hockey's fun. So, I'm as competitive as the next guy and coached, we wanted to do well and whatnot. But I can honestly say, through all of it, hockey should be fun. Maybe not every moment, you're going to have some tough times and challenges, but at the end of the day, if you should have had a good time playing, and that's going to dictate, you come back tomorrow basically. Right. So I'm going to come back tomorrow, I promise, but I'm sharing that because I told her I was going to say this, that she kind of mocks me, but
I like it.
But it's true. Like we live it, right? Like, so warts and all.
Sure. So just as an antidote to that, like when I was thinking about this, I think I told you the last episode, I think the campaign is fantastic. I think it's going to vibrate well outside your OMHA borders.
Right.
Do you remember a defenseman for the Buffalo Sabres named Bill Height?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So his son, Chris is an assistant coach with the, used to coach in the OHL.
Yeah. With Guelph, right?
Played in the OHL. Well, there you go. Yeah. He's now in the American League with the Ontario Reign, the LA Kings farm team. Anyway, so he's been on my podcast, and I asked him, I said, what's the most valuable piece of information or tip that your dad gave you? And he said, and I thought about this when I was looking at your campaign.
Yeah.
He said, my dad had this saying was that, hockey is a game of reminders. Like the game's really simple. Sometimes we just need a reminder about some of the things that we learned before. And when I see the campaign that you guys rolled out, it reminds me to have fun. And I've just thought about this, is it's probably just as much as a marketing campaign to families that may be considering hockey as it is to families that are, been playing for a long time, as a reminder to them that, hey, we're all here to have a good time, have fun. And I think my point is like, I think we all need those reminders, right?
Correct.
You and I live it, right? Like it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, this is supposed to be fun. And we're human. We need that little, shoulder nudge as well once in a while. So again, kudos to you and your team. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's been, again, well received outside your hockey borders, and other people have been able to, other organizations have been able to leverage that, which is fantastic. Because I tell you guys all the time, you guys are at this level, at the grassroots level, the OMHA is generally the lead horse. So good on you guys.
Yeah.
And listen, we got so season's underway. Teams have been picked. We got a juicy topic today.
We do.
Yeah, we do. And I think this applies not only to our sport. It is timely. And I think not only for our sport, but I think this is something that all sports are dealing with. And that is, when do you allow players to play up, as in they play up with an older age group?
Right.
And there's probably a lot of ways we could tackle that. But I thought we could start, Justine. I'd love to hear your perspective or philosophy from a 30,000 foot view on this topic.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Again, lived this a little bit. So, and then certainly seen different players and whatnot, but to me, I guess, one starting point is players should aspire to play at the highest level they can, right? That's going to challenge themselves. Like skill, playing with like skill. We've talked a lot about that, Aaron, right? Making sure, so that's going to benefit everybody. If there's too big of a skill gap, that can create problems for both the players at the top end of that group and the bottom. So I would say, I would say, there's an overarching thought that players should play at the highest level that they're capable. So there's my starting point. That's what I would,
Yeah.
that's what I would throw you know, on the floor to start.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think probably where I would start is that I think often, and I understand why,
Mm-hmm.
that in minor hockey or youth sports, we come up with rules or policies that we put in place with the intention of it sort of covering all scenarios. Meaning
Correct.
it's like, just go to the book. We go to the book. We have a rule for
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And I think that, and that's important, right? But I think this is one where ideally there's just so much nuance at play that no scenario or no player circumstance is identical, and it should probably ideally be on a case by case basis. It shouldn't be like, well, that player did it 2 years ago, so my child should do it. And at the same time, it shouldn't be like, well, that player didn't get to do it 2 years ago, so therefore your child doesn't get to do it. It should be, it should be something that's viewed on a case by case basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, that's definitely the lens every case should be looked through. Uh, I guess the the counter thought to that is, and not to that it should be looked at individually, but the counter should be, play with your own age group, play with your peer group, play with a group that you're, again, generally at the same grade at school, that sort of thing, right? And if you happen to be a better player at that age level, or that group, go out and dominate. That's what you used to hear, right? Go out and
Yeah.
dominate, and be a leader, and round out your game. And I was driving to work this morning, and they're, on the radio, they're talking about a young kid from the London Knights that the Leafs drafted. Easton Cowan is his name.
Yeah.
So he's had a great camp, fantastic camp. Gone out and really, performed well, and made a good accounting of himself. But he just got drafted. He's 18 years old. And they're having to say, pump the brakes a little bit. Let him go back to junior. Let him, again, let him dominate. Let him go play on the World Junior team, and let him, fill other kind of parts of his not only his game, but of, like I say, being a leader, and maybe playing in different situations, and that sort of thing. So there's the flip side to it, right, Aaron? And within that, to your point earlier, now we've got to navigate it for each player, differently, I would say, or at least uniquely. Maybe that's what, a better way of putting it.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you bring up Easton, and great
Yeah.
story. So,
Yeah.
I one of my if I was to pick like three television programs that I can watch every year, like I could only watch three.
Okay.
One of them's the NHL draft. Like I'll watch it. I love it. I find it's great theater. If I need to zone out, I've got
Yeah.
on a PVR. I'll watch it like 17 times throughout the year. Anyways, I can recall when the Leafs selected him, and the panel of experts, draft experts, were like, "Oh, this is a
Yeah. Too high. He
terrible
was
pick,"
picked too
and
high.
they're
Sure.
reaching. Yeah, so then I saw the articles this week out of all the positive press coming out of the camp, and so my point is, this was a young man, from my understanding, that never played up. In fact, he didn't even play with the Knights. He didn't start out a 16-year-old year with the Knights. He had to go play. Spent most of the year in Junior B, and was a call up,
Yeah.
which is unusual, very unusual for a first round pick. So, again, going back to the point of the case by case basis,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's not the right fit at the time doesn't mean a player is not going to develop and be able to compete at the highest level. Every player has their own journey. I would think, Ian, that you get pulled into some of these conversations just in your role.
Yeah.
When you are, what is your criteria to evaluate if playing up is the right scenario for a player?
So I would say we don't get directly involved at the player level. What we're
Got it.
doing is we're trying, and it is a little bit of what you said earlier. It's we if an association is going to have a player play up, they've got to have a policy or a plan regarding how those players are either identified within the group or to the point of saying, you have to be in the evaluated in the top whatever number of players. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So our first and foremost is just that you have essentially that you've put some thought into this, and as an association, either you're in favor of it, or maybe you're not. Or again, in the situations where it does come up, here's going to be our process to evaluate. And that's kind of more our role, or at least hands-on in terms of create some kind of structure. And more than anything, Aaron, it's just have some thought into it, because when you get that question, 2 days before tryouts, it's indecision or lack of clarity or whatever, that just leads to other problems down the road. So if it's clear and this is going to be our process, and we've talked about evaluations, if you've got a process and you communicate that process, follow that process. So that's that's certainly part of that. At least that's the part where we would be involved. I've got a question for you though. Okay. So because you've seen a lot of these players, and there's been some players from out west recently, right? Conor Bedard is probably the most prolific version. Out here we have John Tavares, who from Southern Ontario, now is captain of the Leafs. Both of these guys were, I certainly know in the case of Tavares, played up since 8 years old, played up the whole time. My understanding is Bedard did the same. So, and these guys all the way up to exceptional status at the NHL. So I don't think when we're talking about playing up at minor hockey, it's about, are they going to be exceptional status when they're 15 years old? But I do wonder what you see with, these players being advanced, more mature, probably both physically and emotionally able to not only play but interact with kids a year older, but they do it all the way up, Aaron. You know what I mean? It's not I mean, what's your thoughts on that in terms of, I guess, as opposed to kind of maybe a year here or a year here, being, kind of being there from early on and staying there.
Yeah. So, man, I got a couple stories I could share here.
Yeah.
I'll start here. So I would say, just for whatever it's worth, I've been working in hockey for 23 years now.
Yeah.
I've seen examples of a lot of kids playing up. If I was to count out all those cases, and put a check mark beside the names of players where they earned a living playing the game, whether that was in the National Hockey League or Europe, I would say there's, at most maybe a third of those players ended up, excelling to the point where, hockey became a way that they made a living. So point being, there's probably more kids that were granted that opportunity and it just never played out for them. So I think that's worth considering. So I'll talk to you about, like you mentioned, Bedard. So I was the hockey director at the North Shore Winter Club. At that time, Conor Bedard was a member of the club, but had left. He came back, he skated all the summer, used our ice. But he went to North Vancouver Minor Hockey, larger association, probably not traditionally known as as an elite association, but he played up a year. And also worth noting that in British Columbia, unlike in Ontario, our age groups play together. So U15 is, 13 and 14-year-olds.
2-year age groups.
Whereas so potentially you're playing up against some players that are a year older, some that are 2 years older.
Wow.
And so for Conor, he was always the best player, regardless of where he was playing. And at the time, when he was playing with his peers, I think there was a desire to move up, and perhaps that wasn't granted at some younger years, but it was the right call. However, I think if you were to talk to Tom and Melanie, his folks, they would tell you like Conor's success was not related to playing up. It was related to a kid that was just driven by something that very few have, right? Like, and obviously just he's got the talent and the DNA to support that. I'll give you another example though. Do you follow are you following kind of the NHL draft this coming year?
Well, I know you're going to talk about the kid who's at BU. Is it BU or BC?
Yeah. So BU, Boston University, Macklins, Celebrini. So when I joined the North Shore Winter Club, Macklins Celebrini was playing as a first-year Pee-wee on our Pee-wee A1 team. And he had played as an underage, so he had played up on the Pee-wee A1 team. So he's in a scenario where he's either going to play up in Bantam or U15, or he's going to play a third season on our Pee-wee A1 team.
Right.
Now, when I first get hired, our Pee-wee A1 team goes to provincials in BC. I go out to watch them. And Macklin was clearly a very, very good player amongst a lot of very, very good players. Like if you look at that roster and where those kids are, a lot of players are currently playing junior hockey or were in some cases drafted in this most recent draft. And so his dad, Rick is currently the director of sports medicine and science, or sports science and performance with the Golden State Warriors.
Oh,
has worked with the Canucks, Vancouver Whitecaps, really smart guy, soccer player himself. His mom's an athlete as well. All the boys, his older brothers at BU, the younger one's might be the best of the bunch. So just to paint a picture, right? So Rick comes to me, we had a bit of a, we knew each other before me taking this role. And he's like, what do you think about Macklin playing up? No, at the time, because we have academies out here, our Bantam or U15 program wasn't on a quote unquote like an A1 level. Like it was entitled, but it wasn't, necessarily the best kids. It was probably a lot of kids that had grown up playing a couple tiers down. And I said, gosh, I said, you know what? Like it's a really tough call, Rick. I said, I just don't know if the environment, I don't know what the environment's going to be like there. I know he's going to be in a really competitive environment. They have a chance to go to Quebec, et cetera. And, so we go back and forth, and Rick was great, was really open-minded, and obviously had done a lot of his own research, and obviously is, works in the industry. And so the decision was made that, Macklin was going to play with the Pee-wee A1 team again. So he goes there, and I would go and watch, and this is what I would say is one of the criteria.
Okay.
One is that, if you have, and I know I'm sucking all the oxygen out of the recording here, but
no, it's good. I love it. This is a real example.
So here's the thing. If we were to line up all the weaker players, let's say in an age group on the goal line, and we told them to have a race to the other end of the rink, somebody's going to win.
Right.
Somebody's going to be the fastest. If we line up all the best players in a specific age group and tell them how to have a race, somebody's going to win. And so there's always going to be a best player on the ice. So my point is, just because you're the best player on the ice doesn't mean that the right move is to move up. My criteria, and this was the case with Macklin, is he did not have to exert a lot of energy or effort to be the best player on the ice. That was really, really clear. He was the best player by putting in little, I'm not saying he didn't put in a maximum effort because he's an incredibly hardworking kid, but it was just clear, it wasn't required for him to be the best player. So that would be one of the criteria I have. Right. So two, we start, open the door for Macklin to go up and play up with the older team. And when he does, he was the best player. It was really clear of that group. And again, granted, this wasn't a super high level team. So we run into this scenario later in the year where there was a little bit of turmoil on that team. A coach gets removed. I have to step in. And a lot of parents, for a lot of good reasons, are, there's a lot of tension. They paid a lot of money. And we're like, we got to get through the year with no more hiccups. So
Right.
you can imagine that if you've put all this time and effort and a younger player gets called up, and, I get it from a coaching perspective. If that's the best player you want to win, it's easy to just nudge them out the door a few more times. And I go to the coach. I'm like, listen, when you call, we had a particular game that was, probably an hour and a half drive away. It was a midweek game, probably like Ontario in the middle of winter. It's not fun driving when it's raining or snowing or the conditions.
Sure.
And so last minute, Macklin gets called up to this game. And I tell the coach, and I'm like, listen, you can call him up. I don't necessarily agree with it. It's going to give you 10 forwards. So that means it's not an equal rotation.
Yep.
And I said, listen, Macklin cannot get the most ice time. He just can't, because it's just going to cause a you-know-what storm. And I said, you as long as you're okay with that, but if you want to bring him up, that's your call. So he brings him up. I'm at the game. I couldn't tell you what the result of the game was, but Macklin didn't play any more or any less than any of the other players.
Right.
And I get a call from Rick on my drive home, and he's like, hey, and I think he was in Golden State at the time. He's like, hey, I just got a call from my wife saying that like Macklin barely played. And I said, well, Rick, I was at the game. I said, I don't think that was necessarily the case. And I say this knowing that as parents, we all see things through a different lens, and that's fair. Right. I'm the same way. I'm putting my hand up. I'm the same way.
Sure.
But I said, listen, I said, listen, he didn't play any more, any less. And I said, but he definitely didn't play as much as he plays on the Pee Wee team, where he's out the door a lot. But I said, it wasn't like he definitely was not sat, right? The conversation goes on for a couple more minutes, and Rick hangs up on me. We've never spoken since. And again, I don't hold any grudge. They've raised three, aside from being three, really good hockey players. They're three, outstanding young men and people. Yeah. But here's the moral of the story. Should Macklin have played up in hindsight? Absolutely. Was he ready physically and mentally? 100%. He's probably the most mature kid out of that bunch.
Yeah.
And that's by no means throwing shade on anybody else.
Sure.
But also in hindsight, is Macklin probably going to be the first overall pick in the NHL draft this year? Probably.
Right.
So I guess that's my point. Like, I don't think anybody's ever, excelled in our sport because they played up. I do think there's a lot of cases where kids probably, in the long run, probably hurt themselves because they played up.
Right. That's a great story. It really speaks to, again, the exceptional are the exceptional. So there should be less of them, right? There should be.
Yeah.
So for everyone else, we're looking at this, and I mean, even for those players, it's a process. It's again, it's all the cliches. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Enjoy it while you're there. Right? That's the other conversation I've had probably 3 or 4 times this week, Aaron, about
interesting.
Enjoy the moment. Like don't be in such a hurry. Like we're just starting this year. Don't be worrying about who's coaching next year, right? Like truly enjoy the moment. And it sounds overly simplistic, but I can tell you from my own perspective, it goes by quickly.
Oh.
You'll blink and you'll miss it, and you'll be like, wow, and you won't think of those games where you don't think, you should have got, your son or daughter should have got another shift. You'll just say, boy, I really enjoyed watching, and going to this event and this tournament and whatever. So, I mean, if that's part of this talk, is just see that hockey experience as a process and a long-term process.
For sure. And I would say, like, if we were to dive into the data, the data would show us, we all know what the odds are of a player or young player playing one game in the National Hockey League, let alone making it a career. Out of the players that achieve that goal, very few of them probably played up.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show, like, I think what happens sometimes is because, you know, one player, say in an association or a given area, does it. The
Right.
inclination is for everybody else whose kids might be the best player. And again, on every team, there's a best player. It just is. Says,
Yeah.
well, then that's the natural step, is they have to play up. So I think we're talking about just a finite percent of kids that should
Hmm.
even be in the conversation for this type of scenario. And I think another thing worth looking at is maybe a way to evaluate is when that player is on the ice with their peer group or same age players,
Right.
does it affect the development of the other players on their team? Meaning, does it impact their ability to touch the puck because it's always on the stick of
Oh,
another
wow.
player? Or are
Yeah.
they not able to keep up? Are they not able to process the game at the same level? So therefore, like, even when, a gifted player gives them a pass, they don't get it because they just never saw it coming. And to me,
Right.
that's probably, I think those two things is a player in a position where they don't have to try very hard
Yeah.
to dominate, and B, does them being on the ice impact the development of the other players? And to me, those would be the two criteria to really consider.
Yeah.
And I'll just finish here is that, I've been lucky to coach some pretty good players. Um, I've had parents come up to me and suggest that their players, their son or daughter, should be playing up. And this is, as a coach working in the agent business, etc. I've never had a player. I've never had a player say, I'm too good. I need to move up. Because they're probably, to your point, Ian, they're too busy just having fun, hanging out with their buddies.
Right.
And that's probably, it's never even occurred to them that they should be playing up. They're just having fun with their pals. They're good.
Nah, you know what? That whole message is a great message. And this is the other thing that came up in a couple conversations I had this week. And it's the term, and we're saying it. I think sport in general is saying it, especially youth sport, and not just hockey, but this goal of being player centric. You've heard this term. We want to be player centric. So that means we want to put the
Yes.
player first, and we want
Yeah.
player experience to be, the driver, the most important thing. Not who won, but player. So player focused, player centric, and as we try and do that for a parent, and again, guilty, for a parent, player centric is your player, right?
Yes.
Whereas what a coach is trying to do, what an association is trying to do, what we're trying to do is we want to be we want to be player centric as well, but we're talking about all the players, right? So player centric doesn't mean one player. I think that's an important reminder too, because to your point,
Yeah.
that one player, what's the impact they have on the other players and vice versa. And again, so we talk about too big of a skill gap, that can be a negative influence, right? Both ways. But just that concept of being player centric, but keeping for the benefit of everyone, right? Like it's tough. It's tough because we're human, but that's the goal, right?
Well, and to that point, and you use that example in minor hockey, and I understand that
Yeah.
associations have to be mindful that as soon as you open that door,
Yeah.
people are going to want to kick it in. And so, great example, you go back to Conor Bedard. So Conor Bedard was the first player in the Western Hockey League who was granted exceptional player status, as was Aaron Ekblad, Jonathan Tavares. I know Sean Day was probably, I think, the only player from the OHL where things may have not panned out. Connor McDavid,
Correct,
etc. Right. So, and you got the Mishka kid who's playing in Saginaw right now. So here's my point. I know that was sort of an OHL Ontario thing where you'd have these kids play up. Connor's the first one, the Western League. But I can tell you, so Hockey Canada is involved in this process.
right?
So we only hear about the kids that are granted exceptional player status.
Yes,
I know from Hockey Canada, like the list of families that apply
right.
goes up year and year. And every time somebody gets it, like more and more players, like again, so it just goes to show you, I get it from an association because as soon as the doors open, then everybody's like, I want to be on this wave. This looks really cool. It must be. So I think, again, I think there's a lot of considerations at play. I do think, obviously, in Ontario, it's a little bit more manageable just because you place kids in groupings based on their birth year. So if you're playing up, you're only playing up. And obviously if you're a January birthday,
Sure.
Might make more sense. And I
Yep.
totally get that. The other thing I think where it really applies is in smaller associations where a
Right.
family might say, hey, I don't want to move my kid. I don't want to send them away. But just based on the numbers where there's not, like, it just might be really obvious that and I think in those situations, like, yeah, I mean, we play in a small town here, and I totally get it. Like for families, like I don't think it should be very rigid. I think the goal should be to
Uh,
keep kids at home in their association, and if that's the choice of playing somewhere else or moving away, I think like
that's a
let
great.
be rational in the same way that like in smaller communities where it's tougher to get coaches. I am personally of the belief um, there should be parent coaches. And I know in a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
small towns, there's this rule, there's not. And it's because, years ago, somebody, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
like if we can't if we're having to pay coaches who aren't that qualified to coach your kids, but we have a parent who's in it for all the right reasons and is experienced and wants to coach, like, come on. So I think there just
I
needs to be
agree.
in some of these cases, again, case by case basis, we just have to employ good judgment.
So that's your example there. That's a great example. So there, your example there. I mean, earlier I said, hey, players should aspire to play at the highest level they can. So you're
Yeah.
right. If my town doesn't offer AAA hockey, for example, say I'm in a
Yeah.
smaller feeder association, um, playing at the highest level will mean, probably increase traffic, like more time in the car, right? More travel, and it's probably more expensive, quite honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, like you're saying, I could have a way to access, um, again, higher level of hockey, and like skill versus like skill would be to stay but play up an age group. That's that. I mean,
For sure.
that's a great example, and I think that's. That checks these other boxes that we're talking about, right? Be at home, less travel. There's probably it probably knows more kids, even though they're older, in his town than say from more of a regional team. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it doesn't have to move schools like all
Yeah,
the other. And I think again, those are all
it's
really
interesting.
important. Yeah, and I think the other thing is too is like I know we talk about sometimes there's pushback to say like the social aspect of it,
Right.
and I get that, especially around when you get into that say 12 and under versus 12 and above. Like those
No
are
question.
pretty
Yeah.
a lot of different things going on in your life.
Yeah.
When you kind of hit that stage of life, but I think it's also I think a good barometer for all associations and coaches, and I'm not saying this is easy because it's not,
Mm.
is we should all aspire to have a culture or locker room culture that supports a younger player
Right.
being in that room when we're not there.
Yeah.
Hard to
Absolutely.
do, but
Yeah.
if we have a concern where it's like if they're around these kids, they're going to get poisoned, or like I'm like, well, then there's a bigger problem here, right? Like if we're
Yeah.
worried about we should have it like in our association, we should say, hey, the older players should be aware that part of their responsibility in our association or in our community, in my opinion, is that they feel a responsibility to shepherd and set a good
Right.
example for the younger kids in the
Oh
association.
man, you know what? We talk about that even with players affiliating, right? Like maybe they're with the A team and they're affiliating with the double A team, so it's the same age group,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the coaches called them up. Someone's away or there's an opportunity, and just that whole idea that if someone that can be intimidating, right? You're coming. This isn't your
for sure.
team. You're coming as a guest, essentially. You talked earlier about potentially taking someone's ice time, even and what is that? What is that environment like? What is that welcome like? So that's even at the same age we talk about that. Those types of situations. Amplify it, as you say, when it's a younger player. So as you say, shepherding them or welcoming them in, right? And um, I think it's interesting how we get into some of this stuff, and it's it's so much more than just playing up, right? It's you're getting into your club or association. You all wear the same crest, right? You're all from the same place. Even though we're on different teams, we should, that's something, we always talk about the camaraderie of hockey teams, and that's when people retire, that's the first thing they mention, right? We miss that part of it. So that should be the expectation in minor hockey and minor sports as well. There's a whole nother element. And those life lessons we talk about, more than just the X's and O's. It's a great point. And you know what? I have thought of that social element, and again, those age groups and years of change, and puberty and whatnot, right? So, but if it's an accommodating, welcoming, hey, you're one of us, thanks for helping us out tonight, right? That's far different. Especially, like I say, that's more of kind of being called up as an affiliate, right? But it should be no different if it was a player playing up, for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? Just as you say that, Ian, like it is, and I think about other sports, right? Because I've had people say, well, hockey, it's tougher because as you progress, the game gets physical. Obviously at around the time when kids hit puberty, so some kids develop at later stages, and man, like a 1 year age gap can be, using my finger, it can be this big, but it can be this big too. From a physical standpoint.
Sure.
But I hear people say like, well, say like a lot of, young golfers who, go on to say play professionally, they play up, or, in soccer, it's maybe a bit easier because it's not as physical as a sport. And I think that's valid. But then I also think, you look at, say, football in the States where it's, coming through high school, like, traditionally the best players will play in grade 9 with the grade 11s and 12. So again, I think I always go back to, it's got to be, I think the secret sauce here is the adults in the room, meaning you got to have some experienced and rational adults who can sort of look at things on a case by case basis. And then the other part of that equation is, I think you need parents who are looking at it. They're not looking at it through the lens of, if my child doesn't play up, you're hindering their opportunity to play the game. And they're looking at it to say, hey, if it doesn't work out, the sky isn't falling. We're going to be okay. We're going to make the best of it. And the two, and I'll go back to like the Bedard family and the Celebrini family, like great parents, like just, you would never, I'll tell you what, if you had a 5-minute conversation with Conor Bedard, he is the most down to earth, grounded, chill kid that you've ever met. He probably wouldn't even bring up that he played hockey. And so again, I think that's the secret sauce. The adults in the room, if you approach it from a make or break scenario, then I think that's when ultimately the kids get put in a tough spot, regardless of the outcome. It's got to be looked at from a perspective of what's best for everybody, and be honest about what type of culture you have and what environment that child may be leaving, and what type of environment and culture they may be stepping up into.
Yeah. No, it's great advice. Now the one area that I think about is the player who, and this probably applies more to a younger age group. So if we're looking at a player who is looking to play up or plays up at a younger age group, and then the next season, 2 seasons down the road, whatever the case, comes back to their own age group, does that mean that it was flawed in the first place? Does it mean,
that's a great point?
Because I worry, like I think about if the rationale is, if I don't get a chance to play up, it's going to hinder my development, and then down the road, that player is coming back to their own age group again. Could be social, could be maybe the kid didn't grow. We were just talking about that side of things. So there's a size difference that kind of has evolved. Yeah. So it's coming back to their own age group. But I also think that there's the side of it. Well, the kids who stayed in their own age group, I don't want to say they've caught up, but they've just stayed in that process and
Yeah.
have continued to develop. So there's something to be said about that too.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any hard or fast rules here. And I think a really good
Yeah.
example of what you're explaining, Ian, is so, as I've shared on the show, like I've got a little guy. So
Yeah.
they've just combined out here in BC. It used to be there was U6, so 4 and 5 year olds kind of did this. They didn't play any games. They had their entry point. Then U7, you start playing games halfway through the year. Well, they've combined those age groups. So we're going through this, I guess, a transition here. But my point is that where we're at today, there are some kids when we let's say we scrimmage and we
Right.
put all the kids together.
Right.
There's some kids there's basically there's 4 kids that touch the puck the entire time. The other kids they never touch the puck in a scrimmage. And I look at it through my lens, and as much as I recognize that some of these kids are pretty good and they're the ones that touch the puck, again, through my lens and my experience, I don't think we have any exceptional players. We have a lot of good players, but nobody's exceptional. But I would also say at this stage, you could probably make a case where it's in the best interest of the players, both some of the weak players to move the stronger players up. Those other players develop they get a better opportunity to develop because they touch the puck. But I also know that in 2 years' time, the gap's going to close considerably, and those other kids are just fine playing with their age group. It's just, so again, I think it's a case by case.
So looking, it's interesting because I've heard this from our associations too. They are looking, again, talking about player-centric, doing what's best for all the players, but looking at those groupings and where those natural breaks are. That's what you're saying, right? There's a natural break with those 4 kids, right? Compared to the rest of the group.
And I'm for sure. And I mean, I'm living this right now, and we've got this whole new set of rules. So for example, we're supposed to declare rosters, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this, I'm like, if we're really doing this for the best case of the kids, at this age group, in my opinion, and I know that this happens in a lot of European clubs where obviously they only have to adhere to the rules of their club, where they say, hey, at any point in the year, they tell it's fluid. Like we can move players up and down. So if a player is like, we're trying to pick teams now, and I'm urging so I'm like, listen, don't pick teams now. Because if we pick the teams we pick now and the teams we pick in December, the kids aren't playing games until January. I said, there's no rush, are going to be totally different at this age.
Right.
So why make a decision now that we don't need to make?
That's a great.
And I think ideally at the younger levels, ideally it could be a fluid situation where, and again, I say this knowing it's not necessarily realistic, but it would be great if all the adults could just say, hey, players are going to move up and down throughout the year. Nothing's hard and fast. And it's not a reflection of your child's never going to be good enough or that we're trying to take anything away. It's just, we're measuring this based on, honestly, puck touches and opportunity. And if that's all we measured it on, then this probably makes a lot of sense.
Well, and again, I tell you, that player comes home and says, did you see me touch the puck there? Did you see that shot I took? Like, it's not, and it doesn't have to be, did you see me go around 8 guys and score? Like, but the difference of saying, hey, did you see me touch the puck and shoot it versus, how was your game today, Aaron? And you're like, yeah, like the recipe is they gotta have fun so they come back. And I'm taking down another path, but I firmly believe it. So I think what you're saying makes a ton of sense. I mean, that's think about this. So your guy Ozzy is 5? No, he's 6.
He's 4. He's 5 in November.
He's 4, turning 5. Okay. So what you just said, where these guys are going to be in December versus where they are now, like half a year to a 5-year-old is a considerable amount of time in their life.
Oh,
so they're changing in how they change in half a year is is incredible, right? So I'm sure you see it for everything. You see it in boy, I mean,
Well,
probably his
yeah.
reading, his speech, his writing, like, his sports,
And,
his balance and coordination, all of it, right?
and you know what happens? And again, I'm just,
Yeah.
and any parent that says they can't relate to this, they're full of crap. When your kid, because you mentioned he's reading, well, your kid starts to read and you're just like, oh my God, like he's just this brilliant little, like you have those moments, right? Like, so
Yeah,
I get
sure.
it. We all look at our kids and we're like, oh, this is just the most amazing thing. Or they,
Yeah.
they start stick handling the puck and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. But you got to temper that. But here's what I do know if we look at it through a kid's point of view. So we've got this
Yeah.
point in the season where we've now, because the guidelines were you have to keep all the kids together, you can't segment them or anything, where we just broke into working groups. Ian, we had 47 kids on the ice.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
it's bananas, right?
Yep.
It was chaos. We
Yep.
put the kids in working groups based on their own level, and the chaos came down about
Oh,
50 degrees.
yep.
Everybody touched the puck. The kids are more comfortable. It's easier to move them for group. But then we do the scrimmages, and it's like the kids that never touch the puck, guess what? They're touching the puck and they're scoring
Exactly.
goals. So they're working harder and they're motivated.
They're more
And
engaged.
I'm
Yep.
watching. So we have this kid in our neighborhood. He's got, when little kids have the little like Jeeps they can drive, the little
Yeah,
like
sure.
toy Jeeps.
Yeah.
So we got one of those in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And every time that comes out, every other parent whose kids doesn't have a Jeep just is like rolls their eyes because they're like, it's just a fight. Because what's not fun is watching other kids drive the Jeep. Just like it's no fun watching other kids touch the puck. Kids don't really care. They just want to drive the Jeep and they just want to touch the puck and have fun. Like that's all they really care about. I'm convinced of that.
Great. The best analogy maybe I've ever heard, because everybody can relate to that story. And you're right. Everybody wants to be driving the Jeep. No question. No question.
Yeah,
I mean, tiering, like grouping those players or tiering them by ability. Like within your group that you're doing that, I'm telling you that also is secret sauce. Like that's, as you said, that made your whole ice plan, have some control, manage, everyone's involved. I mean, I'll tell you what, Aaron, that's the secret sauce. No question. Brilliant.
No, it is, but all this, we're gonna put the bow on this, Ian, because it all goes back to the little thumbs up that your wife gave you when you walk out the door in the morning.
Yes,
it's just at the end of the day, it's just got to be fun.
Yeah.
And if and I think that nobody's having more or less fun based on playing up or down or any of that. Everybody's having fun if they get to participate, if they feel like they're a part of the team, if they can, and if we can check those boxes, we're 99.9% of the way there, I believe.
Right.
So
because those players will find their watermark. I believe that completely, Aaron.
Yeah, and there's nothing that makes kids not want to try hard like not being involved.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not being able to. So yeah, I think if that's other barometer, just making sure that whatever level your child's playing at, that they're touching the puck, they're getting their reps, they're involved, they feel like they have an opportunity to contribute, and that's probably, frankly, a good rule for life for all of us, because I don't like sitting on the sidelines either.
Well said. No, you're bang on.
Well, hey, listen, man, I think this was this is an important conversation. I know it's one we haven't really touched on before, so I'm glad we had the opportunity to have it. I hope that was helpful for anybody listening. And again, I think it's, as much as it's an isolated scenario or case, I think perhaps the rationale applies to a lot of the challenges or decisions that we have to make in youth hockey. So hopefully we shed some positive light on the subject, and everybody in Ontario, just like everybody out here in BC and across the country, are playing at the level and that's appropriate for them. And let's have some fun.
Hockey is fun.
Hockey is fun. Good seeing you, my man. We'll catch up in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening, everybody.